The scent of hay and gun smoke hung thick in the air as Fiona Armstrong pressed herself against the weathered barn wall. Her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the 6 outlaws surrounding the structure could hear it. Arizona Territory, 1878, a place and time where a woman alone might as well have a target painted on her back. "Come on out, Miss Armstrong," called a gravelly voice she recognized as belonging to Silas Tanner, the notorious leader of the Tanner gang. "We just want to have a friendly chat about that testimony you're planning to give." Fiona clutched the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. 1 gun with 2 bullets against 6 armed men, the odds couldn't be worse. 3 days ago, she'd witnessed the Tanner gang rob the Lone Pine stagecoach and murder the driver in cold blood. Now they were determined to silence her before she could testify. "I'll die before I let you touch me," she called back, her voice stronger than she felt. Cruel laughter echoed outside. "That can be arranged, darlin'." The barn's back entrance was blocked by 2 men, and she could see shadows of the others through cracks in the wooden slats. They were closing in, taking their time, enjoying her fear. "We're burning this place down if you don't come out in 10 seconds, Tanner shouted. Fiona's mind raced. The closest town was 15 miles away. Her horse had been shot from under her when the gang first spotted her riding across the valley. She'd barely made it to this abandoned barn on foot. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky blood red, she knew her chances of surviving the night were slim. 10, 9, 8. Tanner's countdown echoed off the barn walls. Suddenly, the thundering of hooves cut through the evening air. A horse's whinny pierced the tension, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Precise, methodical shots rang out one after another. "What the?" one of the outlaws shouted before a bullet silenced him permanently. Fiona crouched lower, covering her head as more shots were fired. She heard bodies hitting the ground, curses cut short, and the desperate scramble of men trying to return fire against an unseen assailant. "It's Zachary Quinn." One of the outlaws screamed in terror before another shot rang out. The name sent a chill down Fiona's spine. Zachary Quinn, the bounty hunter whose reputation had spread across 3 territories. Some called him a lawman, others a mercenary, but all agreed on one thing: when he drew his guns, he never missed. Silence fell outside. Fiona held her breath, listening for any sign of movement. The barn door creaked open slowly, and she raised her small derringer with trembling hands. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the dying light. Dusty boots stepped into the barn, spurs jingling softly with each deliberate step. As he moved further inside, the last rays of sunlight illuminated his face, strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble, piercing blue eyes scanning the shadows, and a worn Stetson pulled low over his forehead. "Miss Armstrong." His voice was deep, with a gentle quality that seemed at odds with the gun still smoking in his hand. "Are you hurt?" Fiona lowered her derringer slowly, her legs unsteady as she stood. "How do you know my name?" "Marshall in Lone Pine sent me to find you." He holstered his gun and removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Name's Zachary Quinn. You can call me Zach." "You killed them all?" Fiona asked, peering past him toward the barn entrance. "All 6, he confirmed without pride or remorse. "The Tanner gang won't be bothering anyone anymore." "Why would you risk your life for a stranger?" she asked, still wary despite his assistance. Zach's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a hint of personal motivation beyond mere duty. "Justice isn't just a word to me, Miss Armstrong." He offered his hand to help her up. "And no one deserves to die alone in a barn for doing what's right." As Fiona placed her hand in his, she couldn't know that this moment would change both their lives forever, that this chance meeting in a forgotten barn would lead them on a journey neither had anticipated. The territory was vast and dangerous, and despite the Tanner gang's demise, there were plenty more outlaws who would want to silence a witness before she could testify. "We need to move," Zach said, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "There might be more coming. Where will we go?" Fiona asked, following him outside where a magnificent black stallion stood patiently. Zach mounted first, then extended his hand down to her. First, we get you somewhere safe, then we ensure justice is served." As Fiona took his hand and was pulled up behind him on the horse, the warm solidity of him in front of her felt strangely reassuring. She had no choice but to trust this mysterious man who'd appeared like a guardian angel in her darkest hour. "Hold on tight," he instructed as the horse began to move. Fiona wrapped her arms around his waist, catching the scent of leather, gunpowder, and something uniquely him. The bodies of the Tanner gang lay scattered around the barn, a grim testament to Zach's deadly accuracy. As they rode away from the barn, Fiona couldn't help but wonder who exactly Zachary Quinn was, and why fate had chosen him to be her savior. The vast expanse of desert stretched before them as Zach guided the stallion northward. Stars emerged in the darkening sky, offering just enough light to navigate by. Fiona's arms remained locked around Zach's waist, necessity gradually giving way to comfort as the rhythmic motion of the horse lulled her into a state between wakefulness and sleep. "We'll ride another hour," Zach said over his shoulder, his voice cutting through her daze. "There's a line shack ahead where we can rest for the night." Fiona nodded against his back, too exhausted to speak. The events of the day had drained her completely. She'd gone from schoolteacher to witness, from witness to hunted, and now she was whatever this was, a woman on the run with a man she knew only by reputation. "You hanging on all right?" he asked when she remained silent. "Yes," she managed, "just tired, not much further." True to his word, within the hour a small structure emerged from the darkness. The line shack was little more than a one-room cabin used by cowboys during long cattle drives, but to Fiona's weary eyes it looked like a palace. Zach dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs buckled slightly after the long ride, and his strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. "Thank you," she murmured, acutely aware of how close they were standing. He nodded once before turning to tend to his horse, leading the animal to a small lean-to beside the shack where it could be sheltered from the night air. Inside, the shack was sparse but clean. A small table with 2 chairs occupied one corner, a narrow bed another, and a tiny stove stood in the center. Zach moved with practiced efficiency, lighting a small lamp and then the stove. "It's not much," he said, glancing around, "but it's safer than being out in the open." Fiona sat heavily in one of the chairs, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of exhaustion. "I should thank you properly for saving my life." Zach shook his head as he rummaged through his saddlebags. "No need. I was hired to do a job by the marshal in Lone Pine." "Yes." "Marshal Jenkins is a good man. When word reached him about what happened to the stagecoach and that you'd witnessed it, he knew the Tanner gang would come after you." "How did you find me?" "Tracking is part of what I do." He pulled out some jerky and a canteen, offering both to her. "Eat something, we have a long ride tomorrow." Fiona accepted the simple fare gratefully. "Where are we going?" "Pine Creek. It's a small settlement about 30 miles north of here. There's a woman there I trust. You'll be safe with her until the circuit judge arrives next week." "And then I testify," Zach nodded. "Your testimony will ensure that anyone connected to the Tanner gang who's still alive will face justice." "Are you a bounty hunter?" Fiona asked directly, something in his expression hardened slightly. "I hunt men who need hunting." "That's not really an answer. It's the only one I have." He moved toward the door. "I'll sleep outside, you take the bed." "Don't be ridiculous," Fiona protested. "There's plenty of room in here for both of us. I'm not so delicate that I can't share a room with a man under these circumstances." Zach paused, seemingly weighing her words. "Very well, but I'll sleep on the floor." As he prepared a simple bedroll near the stove, Fiona studied him more carefully. His movements were precise, economical, a man who wasted nothing, not even motion. The lamplight caught the lines around his eyes, speaking of hardship and perhaps loss. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured, his hands stilled momentarily. "You can ask. Why did you really come for me? And don't say because the marshal hired you." "There must be easier ways to make money than facing down 6 killers." Zach was quiet for so long that Fiona thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before. 4 years ago, the Tanner gang raided a small homestead in Colorado Territory. They killed a man and his wife because they happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. That man was my brother, understanding dawned on Fiona, so this was personal. Everything's personal in this life, Miss Armstrong. We just pretend otherwise to get through the day. He lay down on his bedroll and tipped his hat over his eyes. Get some sleep. Dawn comes early out here. Fiona settled onto the narrow bed, pulling a thin blanket over herself. Despite her exhaustion, sleep evaded her as she thought about the man lying just a few feet away. He'd avenged his brother today, yet there was no triumph in him, only a quiet weariness that spoke of a man who had seen too much death. "Mr. Quinn," she whispered. "Zach," he corrected without moving. "Zach, thank you for saving my life." He was silent for a moment. "You're welcome, Miss Armstrong." "Fiona," she offered in return. "My name is Fiona." She thought she saw the slightest curve of a smile beneath the brim of his hat before she finally surrendered to sleep. Morning arrived with harsh brilliance, sunlight streaming through the single window of the lined shack. Fiona awoke to the smell of coffee and the quiet movements of Zach preparing for their journey. "You're an early riser," she commented, sitting up and attempting to smooth her tangled hair. "Old habit," he replied, pouring coffee into a tin cup for her. "We should leave soon." "It's a 6-hour ride to Pine Creek if we push hard." Fiona accepted the cup gratefully. "Tell me about this woman we're going to see." "Martha Wilson. She runs the boarding house in Pine Creek. Her husband was the sheriff until Outlaws killed him 3 years back. She's no stranger to trouble and she knows how to keep secrets. And you trust her with my life." There was something in his tone that suggested a history beyond mere acquaintance. After a simple breakfast of hardtack and more jerky, they set out. The morning was cool, but Fiona knew from experience how quickly the desert heat would build. She was grateful for the wide-brimmed bonnet she'd managed to keep through yesterday's chaos. Riding double on Zach's stallion meant maintaining the same intimate proximity as the night before. In daylight, it felt different, more aware, less desperate. She could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid strength in his back where her cheek occasionally rested. "Tell me about yourself, Fiona," he said after they'd been riding for an hour. What brought a schoolteacher to Arizona Territory? Fiona was surprised he knew her profession. "The marshal must have told you quite a bit about me. Just the basics. Schoolteacher from Boston, traveling west to visit family when you witnessed the robbery. The rest I'd like to hear from you." She hesitated, uncertain how much of herself to reveal to this man who remained largely a mystery. But the vast emptiness surrounding them invited confidence, as if words spoken here might be carried away by the desert wind, leaving only their essence behind. "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Boston," she admitted. "My parents died in a fire 2 years ago. The school where I taught closed. My fiancé—" She paused. "He decided a banker's daughter would make a more suitable wife than a schoolteacher with no dowry." "His loss," Zach said simply. "My cousin in Sacramento wrote that teachers are desperately needed in California. I was on my way there when the stagecoach was attacked." Fiona sighed. "Not exactly the adventure I had in mind. Life rarely gives us the adventures we expect. And what about you?" She asked, "Have you always been a—" She searched for the right word. "Gun for hire," he supplied. "No, I was a rancher once, worked alongside my brother. After he was killed, I tracked down 2 of the men responsible, found I had a talent for it, the rest just followed." "Do you ever think about going back to ranching?" His silence told her the question had struck a nerve. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "Sometimes, but that life feels like it belonged to someone else." They fell quiet after that, each lost in their own thoughts as the miles stretched out before them. By midday, the heat was oppressive. They stopped briefly in the shade of a rock formation to rest the horse and drink from Zach's canteen. "How much further?" Fiona asked, wiping sweat from her brow. 3 hours, maybe 4. Zach was scanning the horizon, his expression alert. "Something's not right." Fiona followed his gaze but saw nothing except endless desert. "What is it?" "Dust cloud northeast." He pointed to a barely visible haze on the horizon. riders moving fast. The Tanner gang had more men than those at the barn, possibly, or it could be unrelated. He helped her quickly back onto the horse. Either way, we're not waiting to find out. They set off at a faster pace, the stallion responding admirably to the increased demand despite carrying double. Fiona held tighter to Zach's waist as they navigated increasingly rocky terrain. We're changing course, he explained. Taking the high route through the canyon, it's slower but offers more cover. The next hour was tense, with Zach frequently glancing back to check for pursuit. The canyon walls towered around them, offering shade but also limiting their options if confronted. I think we lost them, he finally said as they emerged from a narrow passage. But we should keep moving. The landscape gradually changed as they continued northward, desert giving way to scattered pine trees and more varied terrain. Late afternoon brought them within sight of a small settlement nestled in a valley pine creek. We made it, Fiona breathed, relief washing over her. Not quite home free yet, Zach cautioned. Keep your head down as we enter town. The fewer people who know you're here, the better. Pine Creek consisted of one main street lined with simple wooden buildings. A general store, saloon, and small church formed the center, with scattered houses and businesses extending outward. At the northern end stood a two-story structure with a sign reading Wilson Boarding House. Zach guided his horse directly there, avoiding the more populated areas of town. An older woman was sweeping the front porch as they approached. She looked up, recognition and surprise crossing her weathered face. "Zachary Quinn," she said, setting aside her broom. "Been almost a year since you darkened my door." "Martha," he greeted her with a nod as he dismounted. "I need your help." Martha's eyes moved to Fiona, assessing her quickly. "I can see that. Bring her inside before anyone takes notice." Once inside the boarding house, Martha locked the door behind them and pulled the curtains closed. The interior was clean and modestly furnished, smelling of pine soap and baking bread. "Martha Wilson," she introduced herself to Fiona. "Any friend of Zach's is welcome here." "Fiona Armstrong," she replied, extending her hand. "Thank you for taking me in." Fiona witnessed the Tanner gang rob the Lone Pine stage, Zach explained. "She needs a safe place until the circuit judge arrives." Martha's eyebrows rose. "The Tanner gang, that's serious business. It's been handled," Zach said simply, understanding passed between them, and Martha nodded. "I've got a room at the back of the house, nice and quiet, away from prying eyes." She turned to Fiona. "You look like you could use a bath and a proper meal, dear." "That sounds heavenly," Fiona admitted. "I'll see to my horse," Zach said, moving toward the door. "Then make sure no one followed us into town." "Zach," Martha called after him, "room 3 is free, your usual." He nodded in acknowledgement before stepping outside. Martha led Fiona upstairs to a small but comfortable room at the rear of the house. "Bathrooms down the hall." "I'll have hot water brought up for you." "Thank you," Fiona said sincerely. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Martha waved away her thanks. "Any woman brave enough to stand against the Tanner gang deserves a little kindness. Besides, Zach wouldn't bring you here if you weren't worth helping. You seem to know him well." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His family's ranch wasn't far from where my husband and I settled. Watched him grow up, watched him change after what happened to his brother." She sighed. "He's a good man carrying too many ghosts." After Martha left, Fiona sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating this new information. The pieces of Zachary Quinn were slowly coming together, forming a picture of a man shaped by loss and driven by a personal code that transcended simple law or morality. The bath that followed was gloriously restorative. Washing away days of dust and fear, Fiona felt human again. Martha had provided a simple cotton dress to replace her travel-worn clothing, and though it was a bit large, Fiona was grateful for the clean fabric against her skin. When she descended the stairs, she found Zach and Martha in quiet conversation at the kitchen table. They fell silent as she entered, and Zach stood, something akin to appreciation flickering briefly in his eyes at her transformed appearance. "Feel better?" Martha asked, rising to serve stew from a pot on the stove. "Immensely," Fiona confirmed, taking a seat across from Zach. "I'll be staying in town until the judge arrives," he informed her, "just to be safe." "Is there still danger?" Fiona asked, suddenly anxious. "Probably not," he admitted, "but I don't believe in taking chances, not with something this important." The simple meal that followed was the most delicious Fiona had tasted in days, made more enjoyable by Martha's entertaining stories of Pine Creek's early days. Zach remained largely silent, contributing occasionally but mostly observing. As evening fell, Fiona found herself fighting to keep her eyes open despite her earlier rest. Martha noticed immediately. "Off to bed with you," she instructed kindly. "Safety or not, you need your rest." Fiona didn't argue, the prospect of a real bed too tempting to resist. As she stood, she turned to Zach. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "I'll be around," he assured her. "Get some sleep, Fiona." The softness with which he said her name stayed with her as she climbed the stairs. In her room, she moved to the window and gazed out at the darkening sky. Stars were beginning to appear, the same stars that had watched over them as they rode through the desert. For the first time since witnessing the stagecoach robbery, Fiona felt truly safe. Whether that was due to the solid walls around her or the knowledge that Zachary Quinn was nearby, she couldn't say. Perhaps it was both. She slept deeply that night without dreams. The next few days established a rhythm that brought unexpected comfort to Fiona. Mornings were spent helping Martha with the boarding house chores, making beds, preparing meals, and assisting the few other boarders who passed through. The activity kept her mind occupied and her hands busy, preventing her from dwelling too much on the upcoming testimony or the danger that might still lurk beyond Pine Creek's boundaries. Zach was often absent during daylight hours, patrolling the town's perimeter or gathering information from travelers passing through. But each evening he returned to the boarding house for supper, and afterward he and Fiona would sit on the back porch, talking as darkness settled around them. It was during these quiet conversations that Fiona began to truly know the man behind the fearsome reputation. He spoke sparingly of his past childhood on a cattle ranch, a father who taught him to shoot when he was barely tall enough to hold a rifle, a mother who read poetry by lamplight. His brother Michael had been the steady one, Zach explained, the one who stayed to run the family ranch while Zach had wandered, restless and seeking adventure. "I was in San Francisco when it happened," he told her on the third night, his voice low as they watched fireflies dance in Martha's small garden. "Took me 2 weeks to get the news. By then, they'd already buried him and Mary." "Your brother's wife," Fiona clarified. Zach nodded. "They'd been married less than a year. I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but she offered them anyway. The local sheriff wouldn't do anything, said there wasn't enough evidence to prove it was the Tanner gang specifically. His jaw tightened at the memory. "So I tracked them myself. Found 2 of them in a saloon in Denver, bragging about it." He didn't need to tell her what happened next. She could imagine it all too clearly, Zach confronting the men, the inevitable showdown, justice delivered at the end of a gun. "And the others?" she asked. "Took me 4 years to find them all." His eyes met hers in the growing darkness. "Until yesterday." The realization struck Fiona like a physical blow. "The men at the barn, they were the last ones, the ones who killed your brother, Silas Tanner and his remaining men." "Yes." "So it's over now," she said softly. "Your hunt." Something unreadable passed across his face. "Seems that way." "What will you do now?" He looked out across the darkened garden as if the answer might be found among the shadows. "Never thought much about after, wasn't sure I'd get there." The vulnerability in that admission touched Fiona deeply. She reached across the space between their chairs and placed her hand over his. His fingers were calloused, strong, and for a moment he remained perfectly still, as if her touch had frozen him. Then slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers until their palms met, fingers interlacing. They sat like that, connected but silent, until Martha called them in for coffee. The circuit judge was due to arrive in 3 days. As that reality loomed closer, Fiona found herself increasingly anxious not about testifying, which she was determined to do, but about what would come after. Would she continue to Sacramento as planned? The teaching position that had once seemed so important now felt distant and less appealing. And then there was Zach. What would he do once his obligation to protect her ended? The thought of him riding away back to his solitary existence created an ache she hadn't anticipated. On the morning of the fourth day, as Fiona was helping Martha prepare breakfast, they heard the commotion of horses and wagons arriving in town. "That'll be Judge Parker and his entourage," Martha said, glancing out the window. "Man travels with more security than the president himself." Zach entered from the back door, his expression serious. "Judge is here. Trial's set for tomorrow morning at the town hall." "So soon?" Fiona asked, her heart rate accelerating. "Parker doesn't waste time," Martha explained. "He'll probably hear 3 or 4 cases tomorrow, pass sentences, and be on his way by nightfall." "I need to speak with him first," Zach said. "Make sure he understands the situation with the Tanner gang." "And after the trial?" Fiona couldn't stop herself from asking. His eyes met hers briefly before sliding away. "Let's get through tomorrow first." The day passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Zach was absent for most of it, meeting with the judge and the makeshift court officials. When he returned in the evening, his manner was distracted, thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Everything all right?" Fiona asked as they sat down to supper. "Fine," he said shortly, then seemed to catch himself. "Sorry, yes, everything's arranged." "You'll testify in the morning, and with the evidence already gathered against the Tanner gang, it should be straightforward. You seem troubled." He hesitated, then sighed. "Judge Parker brought news. There's a new gang operating south of here, hitting farms and small settlements. 3 families killed in the last month." The implication was clear: there would be another hunt, another mission to bring justice where official channels had failed. "You're leaving after the trial," Fiona said, the realization settling like a stone in her stomach. "I haven't decided," he replied, but his eyes told a different story. They retired early that night, the usual porch conversation abandoned in favor of preparing for the next day. As Fiona lay in bed, sleep eluding her, she found herself confronting feelings she had been avoiding for days. Somehow, in the midst of danger and uncertainty, she had fallen in love with Zachary Quinn. The realization should have shocked her, but instead it settled into her consciousness with the quiet inevitability of sunset. Of course, she loved him, his quiet strength, his unwavering sense of justice, the gentleness that lived alongside his deadliness. But loving him didn't mean she could keep him. A man like Zach wasn't meant to be tethered, especially not to a schoolteacher with conventional dreams of home and family. Morning arrived with a clarity that seemed almost cruel after her restless night. Fiona dressed carefully in the best clothes. Martha could provide a dark blue dress with a high collar, modest but dignified enough for court. She pinned her hair in a simple style and took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. Downstairs, she found Zach waiting, dressed more formally than she had seen before in a clean white shirt and dark vest. He looked up as she descended, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." She smoothed her skirt nervously. "I want to make a good impression on the judge." "You will," he offered, his arm ready. The walk to the town hall was brief, but felt momentous. Pine Creek's residents watched curiously as they passed, word having spread about the trial and Fiona's role in it. She kept her head high, drawing strength from Zach's solid presence beside her. The town hall had been transformed into a makeshift courtroom, with rows of benches for spectators and a raised platform where Judge Parker would preside. The judge himself was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered despite his 60-some years, with a thick white beard and piercing eyes that seemed to evaluate everything and everyone. Fiona's testimony came early in the proceedings. She recounted the stagecoach robbery in clear, unwavering detail: how the Tanner gang had stopped the coach, how they had shot the driver when he resisted, how she had hidden beneath the overturned vehicle and heard them discussing their next target. "And you are certain it was Silas Tanner and his gang?" the judge asked. "Absolutely certain," Fiona confirmed. "I heard them use each other's names and I saw their faces clearly." And where is Silas Tanner now? Here, Zach stepped forward. Dead, Your Honor, along with 5 of his men. They attempted to silence Miss Armstrong before she could testify. I intervened. Judge Parker's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. You intervened, Mr. Quinn? Yes, sir, under authority granted by Marshal Jenkins of Lone Pine. The judge studied Zach for a long moment, then nodded. I'm familiar with your methods, Quinn. In this case, they seem to have been necessary. He turned back to Fiona. Thank you for your testimony, Miss Armstrong. Your courage is commendable. The trial continued with other witnesses speaking to previous crimes committed by the Tanner gang. By noon, Judge Parker had heard enough. He declared that any surviving associates of the gang would face the full penalty of the law when apprehended, and issued formal recognition of the gang's dissolution. As people filed out of the town hall, many approached Fiona to offer thanks or simply to satisfy their curiosity about the woman brave enough to stand against notorious outlaws. She answered politely but found her eyes constantly searching for Zach, who had slipped away during the final pronouncements. She found him outside, standing apart from the crowd, gazing toward the mountains to the south. It's done, she said, joining him. Yes. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. You did well in there. What happens now? She forced herself to ask the question that had haunted her through the night. Zach was silent for a long moment. I spoke with Judge Parker about the new gang operating south of here. Her heart sank, though she tried not to let it show, and he's asked you to pursue them. He offered me the job, yes. Zach's eyes met hers directly. I turned him down. Fiona blinked in surprise. You did? Why? Because for the first time in 4 years, I woke up this morning and didn't feel the weight of vengeance on my shoulders. He took a step closer to her. Because I realized there might be something worth living for besides hunting down the next target. Hope fluttered in Fiona's chest, but she was afraid to give it wings. What are you saying, Zach? I'm saying that I don't know what comes next, but I'd like to find out. His hand reached for hers, hesitant in a way his gun hand never was. With you, if you're willing. Fiona's breath caught. What about Sacramento, my teaching position? I've never been to California, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Heard it's nice this time of year. Joy bubbled up inside her, unexpected and overwhelming. Are you sure this isn't the life you've known? No, he agreed. It's the life I want to know. He paused, uncertainty crossing his features. Unless I'm presuming too much. In answer, Fiona stepped forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as Zach's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Hope. I take it that's a yes, he murmured. Fiona smiled. That's a yes. They stood there in the afternoon sunlight of a small frontier town at the beginning of something neither had expected to find. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, both were looking forward rather than back. Come on, Zach said, taking her hand. Martha will be waiting to hear how it went. As they walked back toward the boarding house, Fiona felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The danger that had thrown them together had passed, but what remained was stronger, a connection forged in fire, tempered by shared experience, and now blossoming into something neither had dared to hope for. The week that followed was a time of transition and decision. With the trial concluded, there was no immediate reason for Fiona and Zach to remain in Pine Creek, yet neither seemed in a hurry to leave. Martha was happy to extend their stay, her knowing glances suggesting she understood what was developing between them better than they did themselves. You know, Martha said one afternoon as she and Fiona worked together in the kitchen, there's a small house at the edge of town that's been standing empty since old Mr. Peterson passed. Nothing fancy, but solid walls and a good roof. Fiona looked up from the dough she was kneading. Are you trying to tell me something, Martha? The older woman shrugged innocently. Just mentioning it. Town could use a schoolteacher is all. Last one left 2 months ago to get married. And what about Zach? What would a man like him do in a small town like Pine Creek? Pine Creek might be small, but it's growing. Sheriff's position has been vacant since my Henry died. Martha's voice softened at the mention of her husband. Town council's been looking for someone with the right qualifications. Fiona considered this. Has Zach mentioned wanting to stay? Not in so many words, Martha admitted. But I've known that boy since he was young. The way he looks at you, he's not planning to ride away anytime soon. That evening, as she and Zach took their customary places on the porch, Fiona broached the subject that had been on her mind. I've been thinking about Sacramento, she began. Zach's posture stiffened slightly. When would you want to leave? Actually, I'm not sure I want to go at all. She watched his face carefully. Martha mentioned that Pine Creek needs a teacher. Relief visibly washed over him. You're considering staying? I might be, she said carefully, if I had a good enough reason. Zach was quiet for a moment, looking out over the garden where fireflies were beginning their nightly dance. I've been offered the sheriff's position here, he finally said. Town council approached me yesterday. Surprise and pleasure mingled in Fiona's response. Are you going to accept? I told them I needed to think about it. His gaze returned to her. It would be a different kind of life, more settled. Is that what you want? 4 years ago, no. He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. Now, I'm starting to think it might be. Fiona interlaced her fingers with his. We could both stay then, see where it leads. I'd like that, he said softly. Then, with characteristic practicality, he added, we'd need a place to live. Separate places, I mean. Martha mentioned there's a vacant house at the edge of town. Zach nodded thoughtfully. Peterson's old place, it's small but solid. For me, Fiona clarified. You could take a room here or wherever you'd prefer. Of course, he agreed quickly, though something in his expression suggested other thoughts. The conversation shifted to practical matters when they might look at the house, what supplies Fiona would need to start teaching, how soon Zach might take up his duties as sheriff. But beneath the practicalities ran an undercurrent of deeper meaning. They were planning a future, tentative as it might be, in the same place, with their lives intertwined. 2 days later, Fiona stood in the center of what would soon be her home. The Peterson house was indeed small, just 4 rooms in total, but it had charm and potential. Large windows let in abundant light, and a small porch overlooked a patch of land that could become a garden with some work. What do you think? Zach asked, watching her reaction as she explored. It's perfect, she decided, running her hand along a solid wooden countertop in the kitchen. It needs cleaning and some fresh paint, but I can make it home. You'll be all alone out here, he noted, a hint of concern in his voice. It's a 1/4 mile from the nearest neighbor. I'll be fine, she assured him. After everything that's happened, a little solitude doesn't frighten me. Zach nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. I'll help you get it ready before you move in. Over the next week, they worked side by side preparing the house. Zach repaired loose floorboards and a leaky roof, while Fiona scrubbed, painted, and arranged the few pieces of furniture the town council had provided. Martha contributed linens and kitchen essentials, and other townspeople, curious about the newcomers, stopped by with small gifts: a potted plant, homemade curtains, a rocking chair in need of minor repairs. Word spread quickly about Fiona's plans to reopen the school, and mothers began approaching her in town, introducing their children and expressing gratitude. The previous teacher had left suddenly, leaving many families concerned about their children's education. Fiona's arrival seemed providential to them. Meanwhile, Zach familiarized himself with his new responsibilities, consulting with Judge Parker before the latter's departure and establishing relationships with town leaders. His reputation had preceded him, resulting in a marked decrease in disturbances at the saloon and a new respectfulness among the more rowdy elements of town. By the end of the 2nd week, Fiona was ready to move into her house. Zach had indeed taken a room at Martha's boarding house, conveniently located near the sheriff's office. The arrangement was proper and practical, though both were acutely aware of the growing intimacy between them, an intimacy expressed in lingering touches, shared glances, and the occasional kiss when privacy allowed. On the evening before Fiona's first day of teaching, Zach walked her home after supper at Martha's. The late summer air was warm, crickets chirping in the tall grass alongside the path. Nervous about tomorrow? He asked as they approached her house. A little, she admitted. It's been months since I taught, and these children will have different needs than my students in Boston. You'll do fine, he assured her. You have a way of making people feel at ease. She smiled up at him. Do I make you feel at ease, Sheriff Quinn? You make me feel many things, Miss Armstrong, he replied, his voice deepening slightly. Not all of them entirely proper to mention. The heat that rose to Fiona's cheeks had nothing to do with the summer air. They had reached her porch, and as they had each night since she'd moved in, they paused at her door for a goodnight kiss. Tonight, however, the kiss lingered, deepening until Fiona found herself pressed against her front door, Zach's strong body a solid warmth against hers. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. Zach stepped back, maintaining his control with visible effort. I should go, he said, his voice rough. Fiona nodded, though everything in her wanted to ask him to stay. But propriety had its place, even in a frontier town, and especially for a new schoolteacher and sheriff. Good night, Zach, she said softly. Good night. He touched her cheek gently, then turned and walked back toward town, his silhouette gradually fading into the gathering darkness. Inside, Fiona leaned against the closed door, her heart still racing from their encounter. She was falling more deeply in love with him each day, and she hoped that he felt the same. But neither had spoken the words aloud, as if doing so might break the fragile new reality they were building together. The next morning, Fiona stood before 15 children ranging in age from 6 to 14, gathered in the small building that served as Pine Creek Schoolhouse. Their faces reflected a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, outright mischief. Good morning, she began, her teacher's voice returning naturally. My name is Miss Armstrong, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher. A small boy in the front row raised his hand immediately. Is it true you saw the Tanner gang get shot? Fiona blinked in surprise. Clearly, the story had circulated among the townspeople, embellished with each telling, no doubt. That's not an appropriate first question, young man, and you are, Tommy Wilson, madam. Martha's my aunt. Well, Tommy, in this classroom, we'll focus on reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, not on other matters. Another hand shot up, this one belonging to a girl of about 12. Are you Sheriff Quinn's sweetheart? My ma says you are. A ripple of giggles spread through the classroom. Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks but maintained her composure. My personal life is not a subject for classroom discussion, she said firmly. Now, I'd like each of you to tell me your name and what subject you enjoy most. The day proceeded more smoothly after that initial exchange. Fiona quickly assessed the varying educational levels of her students and organized them into groups accordingly. By noon, she had established her authority, and by the end of the day, she had won over most of the children with her engaging teaching style and genuine interest in their progress. As the children filed out at day's end, Fiona noticed Zach leaning against a tree across the road, watching. The children noticed too, several of the boys especially looking at him with undisguised admiration as they passed. How was your first day? He asked, approaching once the last child had departed. Educational, she replied with a smile. I learned that everyone in town is apparently very interested in our relationship. Zach grimaced. Small town, not much happens here worth talking about. Until a mysterious bounty hunter arrives with a woman he rescued from Outlaws, then decides to become sheriff while she opens the school. Fiona locked the schoolhouse door. I can see how that might cause a stir. Does it bother you, the talk? She considered this as they began walking. Not really, though I was a bit taken aback when Tommy Wilson asked if I'd seen the Tanner gang get shot. Zach winced. Sorry about that, word spreads. It's all right, they're children naturally curious. She glanced up at him. One girl wanted to know if I was your sweetheart. And what did you tell her? His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. That my personal life wasn't a subject for classroom discussion. Fiona paused their walk, turning to face him, but if she'd asked me privately, I might have said yes. Something changed in Zach's expression, a softening, a certainty. Fiona, he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. I'm not good with words, never have been, but these past weeks, he took her hands in his. I never expected to find someone like you, never thought I deserved to. Zach, let me finish, please. His thumbs traced gentle patterns on her palms. 4 years I spent living for vengeance, didn't think beyond the next target, the next town. Then you came along and suddenly I'm thinking about tomorrow, next week, next year even. Fiona's heart swelled with emotion. I'm thinking about those things too. I love you. The words came out simply, directly the way he approached everything. I know it's fast, and I know you had different plans before all this happened. But I love you, Fiona Armstrong, and if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly. Joy rushed through her like a river breaking its banks. I love you too, she said, the words carrying all the certainty she felt. And yes, I would like that very much. He kissed her then, right in the middle of the road, not caring who might see. And Fiona kissed him back with equal fervor, her heart full to bursting with newfound happiness. That evening they shared the news with Martha, who received it with a knowing smile and suspicious moisture in her eyes. About time, was all she said, but her approval was evident in the special dinner she prepared and the bottle of wine she produced from some hidden storage. As word spread through Pine Creek, which took approximately 1 day, reactions were uniformly positive. The schoolteacher and the sheriff made a fine couple, townspeople agreed. Their unusual beginning only added romance to the story. The courtship that followed was, by frontier standards, both proper and brief. Zach called on Fiona each evening, often bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book from the general store, once a kitten found abandoned near the saloon. On Sundays, they attended church together, then spent the afternoon on her porch or walking along the creek for which the town was named. Physical affection between them remained restrained in public, but in private moments, the passion they shared grew increasingly difficult to contain. Both were adults who had known loss and hardship. Both recognized the precious nature of what they had found together. 6 weeks after Fiona's first day of teaching, on a crisp autumn evening with leaves beginning to turn golden on the trees, Zach arrived at her house with unusual formality, wearing his best suit and carrying a small box. "You look very handsome," Fiona commented as she welcomed him inside. "Is there a special occasion I've forgotten?" "Not forgotten," he said, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. "Not yet happened." He led her to the small sofa in her sitting room, taking both her hands in his as they sat. "Fiona, these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life," he began, his voice steady despite his evident nerves. "I know we haven't known each other long, but out here, life doesn't always give us the luxury of time." Her breath caught as she realized what was happening. "Zach." He released one of her hands to reach for the box in his pocket. Opening it revealed a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "I can't offer you wealth or an easy life," he said, his blue eyes holding hers intently. "But I can promise to love you, protect you, and build a life with you for as long as I live." He took a deep breath. "Fiona Armstrong, will you marry me?" Tears of joy sprang to Fiona's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Zach, I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such unrestrained happiness that it transformed him. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands were steady, the hands that had dealt death with such precision, now offering life and love with equal certainty. "It's beautiful," she said, admiring how the small diamond caught the lamplight. "How did you get a ring out here?" "Ordered it from Denver the day after you agreed to let me court you." He looked slightly sheepish. "I was pretty confident." Fiona laughed and threw her arms around his neck. "Thank goodness for your confidence, then." The kiss that followed sealed their engagement, a promise of the life they would build together in this small frontier town where fate had brought them. News of the engagement spread quickly, and preparations for a wedding began in earnest. Martha insisted on hosting the ceremony and reception at the boarding house, which had the largest gathering space in town. Women from the church offered to help with decorations and food, while the men organized a collection to build the couple a new house larger than Fiona's current residence and better suited to a family. A family, Fiona mused one evening as she and Zach sat on her porch discussing the rapid developments. I never thought I'd have one again after my parents died. Do you want children? Zach asked, the question direct but his tone gentle. Very much, she admitted. You. Never considered it possible before. He looked out at the darkening sky. But yes, a boy with your spirit, a girl with your smile, I'd like that. The wedding was set for the first weekend in October, just 3 weeks away. The timeline was quick by Eastern standards, but frontier practicalities prevailed. Winter would be arriving soon, and it made sense for the couple to be settled before the cold set in. Are you sure you don't mind the simplicity? Zach asked Fiona as they walked together one Sunday afternoon. You deserve a grand wedding like you might have had in Boston. This is exactly the wedding I want, she assured him, squeezing his hand, with the people who have become my friends in the place that's become my home. She looked up at him with a teasing smile. Besides, my Boston wedding would have been to Frederick Willington III, who thought reading was an unsuitable pastime for a proper wife. Zach made a face. Sounds like a real prize. He was, Fiona laughed, a prize I'm very glad I didn't win. As the wedding day approached, Fiona found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a lonely schoolteacher heading west in search of a new beginning. Now she was about to marry a man unlike any she could have imagined for herself, a former bounty hunter with a deadly aim and a tender heart, a man whose quest for vengeance had somehow led him to love. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cool, the autumn light golden as it filtered through turning leaves. Martha had transformed the boarding house with wildflowers, ribbons, and candles, creating a setting both festive and intimate. Fiona prepared in the room that had been hers during her stay at the boarding house. Martha and several women from town helped her dress in a gown that was another miracle of frontier ingenuity, ordered from a catalog, but extensively altered by the town's seamstress to fit perfectly. It was cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. You look beautiful, dear, Martha said, adjusting the small wreath of flowers in Fiona's hair. Like a proper bride. I feel like a bride, Fiona replied, her eyes bright with happiness. I just hope Zach isn't too nervous, Martha chuckled. That man has faced down some of the worst outlaws in the territory without flinching, but I saw him earlier and he's as jumpy as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. Judge Parker had returned to Pine Creek specifically for the occasion, a gesture that touched both Zach and Fiona deeply. As they stood before him, surrounded by the townspeople who had become their community, the simple vows they exchanged carried the weight of all they had overcome to reach this moment. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Parker declared, his deep voice carrying through the room. Mr. Quinn, you may kiss your bride. The kiss they shared was both proper for the assembled company and expressive of the deeper passion they would soon be free to explore fully. When they turned to face their guests, the applause was enthusiastic and genuine. Pine Creek was not just witnessing a union, but celebrating the completion of a story that had begun with danger and ended in love. The reception that followed was joyous, with music provided by local musicians, abundant food prepared by Martha and the church ladies, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Zach, normally reserved in public, surprised Fiona by leading her confidently through several dances, including a waltz that left her breathless. "Where did you learn to dance like that?" she asked as they took a moment's rest. "My mother insisted," he admitted with a small smile. Said no son of hers would grow up unable to properly escort a lady around a dance floor. "I'm grateful to her wisdom," Fiona said, leaning into him slightly, "among many other things." As twilight deepened into night, the newlyweds slipped away from the celebration. Their new house wasn't quite finished, so Zach had secured a private cabin a few miles outside town for their wedding night and the days to follow a brief honeymoon, before returning to their duties. The cabin was small but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy bed covered with fresh linens, and windows that looked out over a small, secluded valley. Zach had arranged for it to be stocked with food, wood for the fire, and even a bottle of good whiskey. "It's perfect," Fiona said as she explored the space, her wedding dress rustling softly with each movement. "Not as perfect as you," Zach replied, watching her from near the door, his eyes reflecting emotions too complex for words. The moment that followed was both charged with anticipation and tender with new intimacy. As husband and wife, they were free to express the desire that had been building between them for weeks. Yet there was a sweetness to their first moments alone, a careful reverence as Zach helped Fiona with the buttons of her dress, as Fiona loosened his tie and unbuttoned his shirt. Their lovemaking that night was a discovery of each other's bodies, of the depth of their connection, of the joy two people could find in complete union. For Fiona, who had never known a man's touch, it was a revelation tempered by Zach's gentle guidance. For Zach, it was a homecoming to a place he had never been before, to complete acceptance, to unconditional love. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath soft blankets, the fire casting shifting patterns of light across the cabin walls, Zach traced lazy patterns on Fiona's bare shoulder. "Happy?" He asked softly, completely, she confirmed, nestling closer to him. "And you?" "More than I knew was possible." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Mrs. Quinn," the name sent a pleasant shiver through Fiona. "I like the sound of that." They spent 3 days at the cabin, venturing out only for short walks in the surrounding woods. It was a time apart from the world, a sacred space to begin their married life before returning to their responsibilities in Pine Creek. On the 4th day, they returned to town and to the nearly completed house that would be their home. The townspeople had outdone themselves, working tirelessly to finish the essential parts of the structure. It was larger than Fiona's previous residence, with a proper parlor, dining room, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. Some finishing work remained, but it was entirely livable. "Welcome home, Mrs. Quinn," Zach said, lifting Fiona over the threshold in the traditional manner. She laughed as he set her down. "Our very own home. It still seems like a dream." "If it is, I don't want to wake up." He pulled her close for a kiss that quickly reignited the passion they had discovered during their honeymoon. That night, in their new bedroom with moonlight streaming through windows that still lacked curtains, they made love with the freedom of newlyweds in their own home. Afterward, as Zach drifted toward sleep, Fiona watched his face, marveling at how peaceful he looked, so different from the tense, watchful man who had ridden into her life just months before. The weeks that followed established patterns of married life that suited them both. Fiona continued teaching at the school, now with 20 students as word spread about her abilities. Zach settled into his role as sheriff, earning respect for his fair but firm handling of the occasional disturbances. Their evenings were spent together, sharing meals at their dining table, reading by the fire, and discovering the constant joy of sharing a bed. They quickly learned each other's habits and preferences, accommodating and adjusting with the natural give and take of 2 people committed to building a life together. As winter approached, bringing the first snows to Pine Creek, Fiona began to suspect a new development in their lives. Her monthly cycle, always regular, failed to appear. Certain other symptoms, a persistent tiredness, a new sensitivity to smells, occasional nausea in the mornings, confirmed her suspicions. She waited until she was certain before sharing the news. One evening in early December, as they sat before the fire in their parlor, Zach reading a newspaper while Fiona worked on a piece of embroidery, she decided the moment had come. "Zach," she began, setting aside her needlework, "I have something to tell you." He looked up, immediately alert to the significance in her tone. "Everything all right?" "More than all right." She smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Zach seemed frozen, the newspaper forgotten in his hands. Then an expression of wonder transformed his features. "A baby, you're sure?" Fiona nodded. "It will be summer, I think, July or August." He was on his knees before her in an instant, his hands gently covering hers where they rested on her abdomen. A baby, he repeated, awe in his voice. Our baby, are you happy? She asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. Happy doesn't begin to describe it. He looked up at her, and Fiona was startled to see tears in his eyes. I love you so much, Fiona, both of you. She leaned down to kiss him, her own tears mingling with his in a moment of pure joy. From the ashes of her disrupted life and his quest for vengeance, they had built something beautiful, a marriage, a home, and now a new life growing between them. As winter deepened, bringing snow that sometimes isolated Pine Creek from neighboring settlements for days at a time, Zach and Fiona's home became a haven of warmth and happiness. News of the coming baby spread through town, bringing congratulations and gifts, hand-knitted blankets, tiny clothing, a cradle carved by the town's carpenter. This town has adopted us completely, Fiona remarked one evening as she added another baby garment to the growing collection. We've only been here a few months, but it feels like we've always belonged. You make it easy to care about you, Zach said, stoking the fire against the bitter cold outside. You give so much to those children at school, to the women in your sewing circle. People respond to that. And you. She teased gently. The dangerous bounty hunter turned respectable sheriff. I've seen how the townspeople look at you now with respect, not fear. That's your influence, he said, returning to sit beside her on the sofa. You've civilized me, Fiona laughed. Hardly. You were already a good man when I met you, just a bit, focused on certain goals. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing naturally. Best goal I ever achieved was making you my wife. As spring melted the snow and brought new life to the valley, Fiona's body changed with the seasons. Her slender form rounded with the growth of their child, bringing a new glow to her complexion and a deeper tenderness to Zach's gaze when he looked at her. He became protective to a degree that sometimes made Fiona laugh, insisting on carrying even the lightest packages, enlisting Martha and other women to help with school duties, checking in on her between his sheriff's rounds. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she reminded him one afternoon when he arrived at the schoolhouse to escort her home, concerned about a light rain that had begun falling. Humor me, he replied, holding his coat over her as they walked. I've never had a pregnant wife before. I'm learning as I go. The summer of 1879 brought intense heat to Pine Creek, making Fiona's final months of pregnancy uncomfortable. She reduced her teaching schedule, holding classes only in the morning when the air was cooler, and spent afternoons resting in the relative coolness of their home. Zach arranged for the town's midwife, Mrs. Bellows, to stay in their second bedroom as Fiona's time approached, not wanting to take any chances with a first birth in a frontier town miles from the nearest doctor. You're fussing again, Fiona observed as he rearranged furniture in their bedroom to make more space for the birthing process. Can't help it, he admitted. Never been this scared of anything in my life. Fiona held out her hand to him. Come here. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed, and she guided his hand to her belly where their child was particularly active. Feel that, she asked as a strong kick pressed against his palm. That's our baby, strong and healthy. We're going to be fine, Zach. He nodded, though the worry didn't entirely leave his eyes. I just can't bear the thought of losing you. You won't. She squeezed his hand. I promise. Their son arrived on a sweltering August night after 12 hours of labor that tested Fiona's strength and Zach's nerves. Mrs. Bellows proved her worth many times over, guiding Fiona through the process with calm efficiency while keeping Zach occupied with useful tasks. When the baby's first cry pierced the night, Zach was standing at Fiona's side, holding her hand as she completed the final push. The sound transformed him, fear giving way to wonder as Mrs. Bellows placed the squalling infant on Fiona's chest. A boy, the midwife announced unnecessarily. A fine, healthy boy. Look what we did, Fiona whispered, tears of joy streaking her exhausted face as she cradled their son. Isn't he perfect? Zach couldn't speak for a moment, overcome by the sight of his wife and child. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. Perfect, he agreed, just like his mother. They named him Michael, after Zach's brother, with William as a middle name to honor Fiona's father. Michael William Quinn weighed 8 pounds exactly, had a shock of dark hair like his father's, and possessed a healthy set of lungs that he wasn't shy about using. The first weeks of parenthood were exhausting but exhilarating. Fiona recovered quickly from the birth, though Zach insisted she rest as much as possible. He surprised her with his willingness to participate in all aspects of infant care, changing, bathing, walking the floor at night when Michael was fussy. "Where did you learn to be so good with babies?" Fiona asked one morning, watching as Zach expertly swaddled their son after a bath. "Helped raise my brother's children for a while," he explained. "After Mary died in childbirth, Michael was lost for a time. I stayed with him, helped with the twins until he remarried. It was a part of his past he hadn't shared before, and Fiona listened with quiet attention as he continued. Twin girls Elizabeth and Sarah, they'd be about 9 now." A shadow crossed his face. "Haven't seen them since it happened. Your brother's death," Fiona said softly. Zach nodded, gently placing the now sleeping Michael in his cradle. "They went to live with Mary's sister in Denver. I visited once after I found the first of the men responsible, but I wasn't fit company for children then." Fiona moved to his side, slipping her arm around his waist. "Perhaps it's time to reconnect. They're your family, Zach, Michael's cousins." He looked down at her, his expression softening. "You are my family now, you and our son." "Yes, we are," she agreed, "but family can be more than just us. It can extend to include others who share our blood, our history." The idea took root, and by Christmas, Zach had located his nieces and their aunt in Denver. A careful exchange of letters followed, culminating in an invitation for the girls to visit Pine Creek the following summer. "Are you nervous?" Fiona asked as they prepared the second bedroom for the visit. Michael, now 10 months old and beginning to toddle, played on a quilt nearby. "A bit," Zach admitted. "They were so young when I last saw them, they might not even remember me." "They'll love you," Fiona assured him. "How could they not?" The reunion, when it came, was everything Fiona had hoped for. Elizabeth and Sarah, now 9 years old and identical in appearance with their father's dark hair and their mother's delicate features, arrived on the stagecoach with their aunt. Their initial shyness around Zach quickly dissolved when he produced carved wooden horses he had made for them. And by the end of the first day, they were following him around town, proudly introducing themselves as Sheriff Quinn's nieces. They fell in love with Michael immediately, delighting in his baby ways and taking turns helping Fiona care for him. Their aunt, a kindly widow named Helen, formed an immediate friendship with Martha, and the two older women spent hours on the boarding house porch, sharing stories and watching the activity in the growing town. "It's good to see Zachary settled," Helen remarked to Fiona one afternoon as they watched Zach showing the twins how to saddle a pony. "After what happened to Michael and Mary, I worried he might lose himself completely to vengeance." "He nearly did," Fiona acknowledged. "But there was always something more to him than that darkness, a goodness that couldn't be extinguished." Helen nodded thoughtfully. "You've been good for him, given him purpose beyond the next hunt." The visit lasted 2 weeks, and when it was time for the twins and Helen to return to Denver, there were tears all around. But promises were made for future visits, and Zach and Fiona began discussing a trip to Denver the following year, when Michael would be old enough to travel more easily. "Family," Zach mused that evening after the stagecoach had departed, "never thought I'd have one again." "Life has a way of surprising us," Fiona said, leaning against him as they sat on their porch, Michael sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Who would have thought a stagecoach robbery would lead to all this?" "Not me," he admitted. "I was just following a lead on Tanner, finding you." He shook his head in wonder. "That wasn't part of any plan." "The best things rarely are," Fiona said, tilting her face up for his kiss. As the years passed, Pine Creek grew from a small settlement into a proper town. A railroad spur brought increased commerce and new residents. The school expanded to require an assistant teacher, whom Fiona carefully trained. Zach's role as sheriff became more administrative than dangerous, though he maintained his shooting skills with regular practice. Michael grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's intensity and his mother's love of learning. When he was 4, he gained a sister, Emma Rose, born with a crown of auburn hair like Fiona's and eyes that soon revealed themselves to be Zach's clear blue. Their family was complete, their lives full with work, community involvement, and the joys and challenges of raising children in a rapidly changing West. Regular visits from the twins, who grew into accomplished young women, kept them connected to Zach's past in positive ways. In the spring of 1888, 10 years after that fateful day when outlaws had surrounded Fiona in an abandoned barn and Zach had ridden to her rescue, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching Michael teaching Emma how to ride her new pony in the fenced yard. Happy? Zach asked, his arm around Fiona's waist, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night. Fiona looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her older now, with lines of experience etched more deeply and touches of silver at his temples, but still handsome, still essentially Zach. Completely, she replied, leaning into him. And you? More than I ever deserved, he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. From the yard came the sound of children's laughter, bright and free in the morning sunshine. From town drifted the more distant sounds of commerce and conversation, the normal, peaceful activities of a community thriving under the protection of its respected sheriff. And in the hearts of Fiona and Zachary Quinn beat the steady, enduring love that had begun in danger but flourished in peace, a love neither had been seeking but both had found, against all odds, in a forgotten barn on the frontier of a growing nation.